So welcome everybody. I'm glad that you're here. We have about an hour and 20 minutes together today and the same thing next week. And of course, some homework in between. I'm a big believer in that. So I wanted to start first by just sharing a little bit of what I heard from you guys in the survey. And I appreciate the input that for those who were able to take the time to do that. A lot of basically the input seemed to what people were looking for seem to fall into 5 categories. A lot of fresh ideas, looking for fresh ideas, looking for other ideas to help my lesson planning. A few people mentioned questions related to what should I teach and how do I know what to do next and how to do it. There were several questions related to assessment. So we're not going to spend a huge amount of time on that, but I will touch on it at several points because it's important. Welcome, Sandy.
Hi.
Using interactive technology. Yes, we will do a lot of that. And the building rapport, like I just said, we're not going to spend much time on building rapport, but I linked in some ideas. If you haven't seen it yet, I will again send out, well, you all got here, so you got my email. You have a copy of the presentation and all of these links are live, so you'll be able to go back to them. Right? So given that, we're going to start with the what to teach and setting lesson objectives. We're going to spend most of our time in this middle section talking about 2 models. And if you took the basic tutor training, you definitely heard about whole part, whole. And I can't remember whether they use the word continuum in the basic tutor training, but that should look familiar. But this is where we'll spend a lot of time. And then we'll get started on a menu of resources and talk about all different kinds of tools that you can use and where they fit, how to teach from them within the continuum. And we'll do maybe 1 or 2 of the kinds of resources today, and whatever we don't cover today, we'll do next week. All right. And questions, please, at any point, at any time, just raise your hand or interrupt me. I may not see you. That's something else, I guess, to say when I'm in classes. Zoom has these, little reactions or hand raises that you can do. And for me, I see much better when someone puts a big old hand up there or it says, Linda. So I also think for my students, I try to make technology as low a barrier as possible. So, and a lot of students are participating on their phones or on tablets and the reactions are different. I want them just to be paying attention to what we're doing here. And so I tell them if they have a question, they can say Linda or excuse me. In my beginner classes, we've learned excuse me and this kind of hand raise. So I ask you to do the same. All right. Questions before we go? Okay. So, okay, we talked about the survey. So first about how do I know what to teach? How many people first are, I know some of you are teaching now, some of you are not teaching now. How many people are teaching in a program or some way teaching with a book or with a set curriculum? Sort of. Okay, so just a few. And the rest are using their imaginations more. All right, so let's talk about some tools. And when we talk about what to teach, there's a short-term focus and a long-term focus, right? In terms of the long-term, we don't have to recreate that wheel. There are lots of people have spent lots of time on that wheel before. And what I recommend, I'll show you on my little website, there are some different resources in here. That's where that link follow a guide goes. And I'll show you the venture scope and sequence. Basically, even if you're not going to use a book to teach, I recommend getting a book to get ideas. And you can, let's see if I can, yes. Every book or every book worth its salt has scope and sequence in the front, and it tells you what the unit's about. And then what's covered in each unit. So here we have the grammar focus, vocabulary focus, and like I said, even if you're not, your student never sees the book. Let's see if I can make this bigger here. Oops. All right. You get the idea.
Linda, what level is this?
Well, this particular one is a level 2.
Oh, I see.
But the scope and sequence always looks the same. It just has different things in little boxes. With ventures, one of the things that I like about ventures is that the units are always the same in every level. Unit 1 is personal information. Unit 2 is at school. Unit 3 is friends and family. And it just, the material that they cover jumping off those is different depending on the level.
Could you show the links to get to that again?
Yes. I will go. Nope. Here. Okay. So this is my presentation from today.
Okay.
I clicked follow a guide.
Okay.
And my internet tends to be slow, so I'm not going to do I try to do my clicking before class starts. If you click follow a guide, you'll get to this page. This is just my little TESOL web page. And here's the venture scope and sequence. Judy?
I don't know if this is the appropriate time, but can I ask you what you think of Mango? It's a program that's available in the library that the student doesn't have to pay for, and one of its advantages is it has the lessons, various levels, and it also has the student's native language that it gives the instructions in. So.
Yeah, Judy, it's a good question. I have tried Mango, but it's been quite a while, so I don't remember. I'll try and look again before next week.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, I am a language learner. I learned French as a child in French immersion. I grew up in Canada. And I learned Spanish as an adult when I came to the US. And I spent some time in Brazil a couple of years ago and learned enough Portuguese to be conversant on the streets. And I wanted the experience learning a language where I had to learn a different alphabet. So I have been learning Russian. The Asian languages, I think I'm too old for that. That wasn't going to happen. But I started Russian as a beginner at PCC, just taking classes. And it's in that context that I tried Mango and Duolingo and, on and on and on. So, and that experience really informs my teaching a lot.
I read your essay. I remember that. It was really vivid to me as a Spanish student. So thank you for that.
I'm glad. It's been an amazing experience. I think I drive my teachers a little bit crazy, but okay. So for longer term, that's where you can go. For short term, what do I do even within a lesson? After this, after that, what am I doing next lesson? This is where the assessment comes in. Yes, there are, Beaverton Literacy uses a placement test to assess students. We have 7 levels of classes. We have to know where to put them. But really it's listening, watching. Are they struggling? Are they getting it? What are they doing? And we'll talk about some of the tools, especially when we get to looking at the resources, what kinds of tools are particularly good for this, but it's constant. Teachers call this formative assessment. Summative assessment is what you might know at the end of a chapter. Formative assessment is during class. And the teacher's always listening, always assessing. Oh, you had trouble with that. Am I going to address that right away, or am I going to do that next class? And just that constant assessment, which we don't tell students about. They would be horrified.
Yeah.
All right. Lesson objectives and activity objectives too. So this is something that also the students don't see generally. Sometimes in higher levels, I would say, we're going to study this and this is why, but in lower levels, certainly not. 4 guidelines for setting objectives. They should be specific. Now we're going to look at some objectives and decide whether we think they fit these criteria or not. They should be actionable or observable. So enjoy and understand are not actionable, observable results. Sometimes we see the confusion on our students' face and we see their understanding, but still we want them to see what they can do with the lesson. Achievable, right? We want to keep our students motivated and not go too far over their heads. And the lesson objectives need to be very clearly based on what students already know and what they don't know. So this is part of the assessment piece, is always thinking back, what have we done already? What are they having trouble with? And how do we build on that? We go and build the 4th story when they were still on the 1st, that won't work so well. Questions? Okay, so let's see. Wendy, could you read this orange for us, please? Wendy Orloff.
Students will correctly use the past tense of known verbs more often when talking about familiar activities.
Thank you. So specific, is that fairly specific?
More often is vague.
More often.
More often is vague, yep. Past tense of known verbs. That adds specificity. Talking about familiar activities. That adds specificity also. So we just want to have an objective about past tense, using the past tense or knowing the past tense. We can make it a lot more specific, right? And these are things that will help us create our lesson plans, right? Create lesson plans that are going to target the objective. So yeah, this is the, I'm not sure exactly, 9 times out of 10, 6 times out of 8. I'm not sure exactly what to do with this. Any ideas?
It appears to me to be a prediction rather than an objective. So when I create an objective, I want to know, what am I going to do? So it's not students will something, it's what am I going to do to accomplish something?
Actually, it's kind of two sides of one coin. I think of these objectives as the objectives for the students.
Mm-hmm.
So after I do my lesson, they should be able to do this.
Okay.
I think you.
Oh, I see. I get it. Mm-hmm.
I think you could say students will correctly use the past tense of 10 known verbs.
Ah, there we go. Okay. Yeah,
Okay, that's the objective. Okay.
that's good.
It's very specific.
And you can list the verbs.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Yeah, you can list the verbs. Good. Okay. How about this one? Let's see. Mari, would you read it for us, please?
Students will, excuse me, students will correctly use I, he, she versus my, his, her when talking about family.
All right. What do you think about this one?
Students will correctly use.
Seems very specific.
Yeah.
There's no way to measure it.
Mm.
Well, that's the objective, isn't it? Is what I just read.
Correctly use.
Correctly use I, he, she versus my. Oh. So maybe in a present tense.
Ah, okay. Sure. Tense.
What about a percentage of time
Okay.
versus 100% of the time?
So to get around the more often thing,
Yeah.
something like that.
Whose family are we talking about?
How about this?
But do you need,
Okay. Immediate. Yeah.
Yeah, Judy?
do you need the verses? I mean, the idea is that they should use I, he, she, and I think it's confusing to say this is what you shouldn't do, right? So just say this is what you should do.
Well,
He.
Yeah.
So that would be something different. That would be an important objective to correctly use these pronouns. In this case, for a class that already knew this, we
Yeah.
want them to be able to choose. Am I using my or I?
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So this is based on what they already know. To achieve this objective, they already have to know how to use these.
Mhm.
Right? You do this first.
Right.
In fact, I have a Chinese student I was working with today who was very confused about exactly this. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
So you're talking about classes here, and this is intended for people teaching classes rather than individual students one at a time.
No, actually both. I'm
Yeah.
using the word classes, but a class could be for one student. Even if you're teaching one student, you should have objectives and know, what you're doing with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because without the objectives, it's difficult. How do I choose what I'm going to do? How do I choose my activities? How do I know why I'm doing what?
Mhm.
I tend just to pick a subject. We're going to study pronouns. We're going to work through a series of exercises on the use of pronouns. We'll read stuff, we'll practice it. And I don't have a definitive at the end. The student will do a certain thing. If they master it, they do. If they don't, but I'm just going to work through a set of exercises and I've got a specific set of things to do. I don't have a criteria that I will stick at the end of it. Did they in fact use them 90% of the time? I'm just going to work through stuff.
Well, how about, I would guess that even if you're not articulating the objective like this, if you're going to do a unit on pronouns or some lessons on pronouns at the start, you're doing them for a reason, right? You're doing them because the student needs help needs to learn the pronouns. And at the end, if they don't use the pronouns correctly, you're probably not going to go on and teach the next thing. Maybe you'll go back and do some more exercises of different kinds.
Well, that's an interesting point because I tend to not quiz them at the end. I know some of the PCC faculty always have a quiz at the end so they can determine if the student's a master. I tend to work through a chapter and then we've used up the time and then I'm probably going to move on to another topic in the next session.
So I'm glad you brought that up, Arnold, because this comes back to the topic of assessment.
Mhm.
Doing an assessment does not mean a quiz at the end.
Right.
PCC is more academically oriented and they use quizzes and
Mhm.
grades, right? They have to give their students grades. In the community setting, which I think is where most or all of us are teaching or going to teach, our students don't get grades and we don't need to do quizzes. Some teachers still do them, but we're doing formative assessment. We're listening to how the students are talking. We're listening to how they're doing the exercises. That is assessment in real life. In real life, we don't fill in, forms.
Okay.
Yeah, so you're still assessing, and sometimes the student's not getting something and you move on anyway, and that, we all, and maybe then if pronouns are an issue and you've spent a lot of time on pronouns already, you're going to move on, not to bore yourself or the student, but maybe you would integrate pronoun work into the next thing that you're doing. So if the next thing that you're doing is on health, you can talk about my cough and your sneeze, and the doctor is he or she. And you might put a little more focus on those kinds of things than if you knew the student had mastered pronouns, that would not be so explicit probably.
Okay.
So sometimes you can use the quiz both as a learning tool as well as an assessment, and you kill two birds with one stone.
It's all, everything we do is a learning tool, and if it can also be kind of is a learning tool and assessment, it's just a matter of how you structure it. Yeah.
I think that your objectives are just a really valuable thing to help keep the instructor on task, because it's so easy to go the direction of the students and too often to do what's easiest, whatever they're picking up on. But if I have something written down like this, very clear and defined, to help me remember, like, oh yeah, we're off task and we really need to get back on it. You know, there's just nothing more valuable than having clearly stated objectives in front of us at all times. Not in front of the student maybe, but in front of the teacher. So I think this is really valuable. Thank you.
Good. Yeah, I think it's a very important point. It's really easy to wander and to pick an activity that we think is really cool and need to think, okay, why am I doing this? What for this particular student? Why am I using this? What would be our objective for using this? And that's why it's important to talk about activity objectives also. All right, let's just do a couple more. All right. Let's see. Joanne, can you read this for us, please?
Sure. Students will be able to describe a picture to their classmate.
What do you think of this?
I think that's good.
I think it's valuable. The objective could probably be more specific, but I think the objective, the idea is very valuable.
I wonder if one should add the word correctly, describe the picture correctly.
Yeah, there's always that.
What kind of picture?
What kind of picture?
That I think that's really good. A picture of
An activity.
an activity.
Yeah, because they're not describing a picture, they're describing, I think we're trying to have them describe what's going on in that picture, right? Like, John is giving Susie a book or whatever it might be, right?
Sometimes you may not always want an activity, though. It may not have to be an activity.
Right. You just need to describe something about the picture, but also, do you want present tense or past tense, or, if you're
Adjectives?
Almost adjectives.
really good.
Yeah, that's really good. So to Angie's point, hi Angie, by the way. It could be a picture of people. It could be a picture of an activity. It could be a picture of a outdoor scene. And that I would think is important because those different kinds of pictures use very different vocabulary. And they may use very different grammar. You might be having a present continuous, right? She is whatever, swimming or in a beginner class, it might be describing what people are wearing, right? To get color.
Is a pretty vague word. Describe is a vague word.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of ways to describe something.
Right. I agree.
So you might
say something.
So you want to use
verbally describe, verbally or orally, or
you want to use actions or adverbs or adjectives, or which way do you want to go depending on the level?
Right. So you might say using adjectives, or the adjectives that we learned in class. You can go. But I think you have the idea to think about really what will make a difference for the student.
Using adjectives,
yeah.
I think describing needs to be clarified. In writing, is it trying to get at writing, oral skills? What kind of skills are you trying to focus on?
Right. And in this case, I might do it verbally in class and practice writing in class, and then send them home to do it in writing, right? One thing builds on another. But this goes back to what we were talking about earlier about this one, number 4, based on what students already know and what they don't. So if we've been working on adjectives about people, we would be doing a picture of people. Using adjectives. Known. Okay. So for activity, for objectives, a lesson objective may be for more than one class session, right? So any of these, you want to do a lot of practice. I spent in my former life, I was in marketing and communications, and the mantra for a marketing communications person is, when you as the marketing person and communications person are getting so sick of it, you can't even think of it, you can't even look at it anymore, your audience is just starting to get the message. And I think there are a lot of parallels to teaching, right? We're over and I'm like, hey, am I bored yet? And we have to keep ourselves entertained also to a certain extent, but the repetition is so, so critically important. So we're going to think of all different kinds of ways at coming at the topic, be it a grammar language topic or a thematic topic. And then within the lesson, the activities need their own objective. Each activity needs to have a, why am I doing this? And sometimes, technically, I suppose we should be saying, okay, I want an activity that does this. We need to do this, and this is where we're going. And this activity will fit. Sometimes we think, oh, this activity, wouldn't that be cool? I think, okay, now I have to look at my lesson objectives and say, okay, does it fit and how does it fit and what exactly am I going to do with that? Because sometimes there's some videos or pictures that I will use over and over and over. We're going to look at one of them on next week, and I'll do something different with each class. It's sort of one of those videos that lends itself to a lot of different things. So I have to be really careful that I'm very targeted based on my lesson objectives, that I'm not using it for something different just because I've watched that video 1,600 times and I still love it. All right. So, and we're going to talk a lot about activity objectives when we get into the resource bank. Okay, so the two models to guide us, and I have lots of teaching examples here. So model number one, I'm going to give you 3 examples. And then I want you to tell me what you think my objectives were for each one, or what it is, what it is that's important about this model. So here's one example. It's a book, and actually I opened the book. So this is from the Bow Valley, and again, it's linked in at the bottom. It's linked in to the presentation. And there's audio. I didn't actually share my audio. I won't go back and do that, but this is
Mark has a drink.
Oh, I can hear that. I don't know if you can.
Yeah,
We can.
That's excellent. Okay,
yeah, I heard it.
excellent.
The drink is cold. Ouch. Mark has a toothache.
Okay, so you get the idea. And Bow Valley has a whole ton. Some of them are a little harder than this. Some are easier, actually. So we have the book, and that's the whole. We're going to look at the whole book. We'll read the whole book. We'll probably repeat the book. Have the students repeat it, and then I'll do some activities looking at pulling out the text from the book and pulling out these particular words, which have S's, they're verbs. We're going to work with them. Maybe we'll do some substitutions. He makes a cake. He makes dinner. He makes an appointment. We'll get students to fill in what comes afterward. He calls his mother. He calls the dentist. He calls the, etc. I'll ask students, what do they see? What's in common? What's the same about all of these verbs? Try to get them to point out the S and that he has a name. And then we'll go back to the whole, and we'll talk about my favorite topic and yours, going to the dentist. And again, depending what level the students are at. All right, so here's example number 1. Here's example number 2. This is another video that I've used multiple times, 6 fun cooking tricks. It does not have words. This video does not have words, I don't think. It just demonstrates the 6 cooking tricks. So we would look at the whole thing. I would probably ask some open-ended questions. What did you see? What do you think? but specific to the video. And then we could do parts just focused on kitchen vocabulary, in which I would actually bring things from my kitchen. And in Zoom, I would ask my students to bring things from their kitchen. We can do present continuous with ing verbs, likes and dislikes. Have you ever? And actually, have you ever would go back into the whole. Now we'd look at the whole thing again, see if we can describe what they were doing, and then talk about students' experiences relative to that. Whole, part, whole.
So,
Linda, I'm having a little trouble with the concept whole, part, whole. So whole means you present the book. The part is all the different ways you use that. So is that right? And then back to maybe the students speaking about the whole.
no, isn't it?
Judy?
Well, I was just going to say, isn't it not, it's the concept, right? And so your objective in example B is cooking. That's the objective, about cooking. And then that's the whole. And then the part are those different elements of cooking that you convey to the student in some way or another. And then the whole again is going back to general cooking. So it's the concept, right?
All right, that's great. Judy and Catherine, we'll hold that there. I'm going to give you one more example, okay? Those are both great descriptions. Here's an example using a text. Turtles walk, delays plane at Tokyo Airport. This is from Breaking News English.
Yeah.
In case you haven't seen it, Breaking News English has thousands of lessons. They have different levels. These, to me, their level, like their level 0 might be a level 1 or 2 in Beaverton literacy, right? They're even my level 5 students last year, the level 5 was hard for them. Here's the story itself. I will almost never use the story in this format. Actually, in the Mark book also, I generally will copy the text into a Google Doc or a Word document so that I can play with it and do all kinds of things with it. But it's great for its stories. So in this case, whoops, we'll read the whole story. And I probably will start by asking them what they think it's about. We'll read the headline. What do they think it's about? What is a delay? How does a turtle walk? What do they think this is about? Then we'll read the story. Then we'll pick a part. One thing at a time, probably. Maybe I'll focus on vocabulary first. This story has a lot of it and its. So we'll be able to work on that. Could be on past tense verbs. It will depend. I won't do all of these, but I'll probably focus on one and maybe another one at another time. Adverbs versus adjectives. This would be if it was an advanced class. It's often really helpful and useful to use easier materials with advanced classes to dive in, because if you're using a story that's difficult that they could understand, but it's going to be vocabulary and sentence structure issues. But if you want to focus in on something, you can use something that you might think, well, this might be a little easy for them. And then we'll go back out whole, part, whole. We'll go back up to the whole. We'll maybe read the story again, probably after we've worked on something in the middle. And we'll talk about plane delays, what caused it. Well, maybe we'll talk about turtles. Okay, so now back to Catherine and Judy's questions and statements. Whole, part, whole. What do you notice? What do you think? What's important about this model? What would you get from it? Yeah, Ellen.
Oh, it's like it.
It reminds me strangely of a spelling bee where you say the word, then you spell it to the components, and then you have to use it in a sentence to kind of show that you understand the concept all different ways.
That's great. That's beautiful.
It's also like an introduction, or, you know, you're explaining what you're going to talk about and then go into detail and then the conclusion at the end to come back to the whole.
Yeah, Sandy.
Sorry.
And isn't this sort of related to the whole idea of when they teach kids to read using like the whole language, and then they go into phonetics, and then they kind of, so to me, it's kind of like, this is first you start with the overall concept and look for general comprehension, then you drill down into specific skills or specific vocabulary or sentence structure or whatever it is. And then they're going back to, well, okay, now how do they produce this, or what do they do with this now that they have both an overall concept and individual skills?
Yeah, absolutely. Judy Jennings, you were going to say something.
To me, it sort of reminds me a little bit of TEFLA trainings that I've done, where the whole is like the presentation. You're presenting them with what the content, and the part is almost like the practicing, and then the last part, the whole, again, is almost like you're asking them to perform something specific that they've just gone through.
Yeah, Brian.
To me, it sounds like the part might be a specific skill that you want to work on, and that the whole is kind of setting the stage and giving an example without telling you what the objective is. Then we take one piece of that story, that whole, and practice the skill, isolate the skill, and work on that, and then we go back to the whole, because we have opportunity to practice the skill, and plus we've stimulated some interest in that topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Clyde.
I was just thinking it might be useful at the end, and it's something I do sometimes, is summarize the grammatical whole at the end. This is what you've just done. Isn't that great? You just use the present tense correctly 5 times in a row, or something like that, to kind of summarize for the client what they've done, and so they can pat themselves on the back for that, I guess, or make it a significant event for them that they did it right.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys completely have it. It's all, Brian used the term setting the stage. It's so much is about context, right? Even as a native English speaker, if you walked into a room and there were people that you didn't, even if you, well, especially if you didn't know people, you walked into a room and there were conversations underway, it would take you a couple minutes to figure out what are they talking about and what's the previous knowledge that applies here, if they're people I didn't know, or right. And our students with second language learners, we're asking them to do that all the time. And if we come into a grammar lesson or into a vocabulary or whatever, just cold without the context, it's that much harder, as it would be for any of us. And so whole is about setting the context, setting the stage, giving them that background, then diving in, like various people said, to whatever it is that's going to focus on your lesson objectives, your activity objectives, and then coming back out and allowing them to reap the rewards of that, to have a discussion about it, to apply it to their personal experience, to reread the article or rewatch the video when they can understand so much more. Okay. Yeah, Mari.
Yeah. It looks to me the first one is telling them this is what we're going to learn. This next part is like giving them different tools to do that, to learn that. The third part, the whole, is to actually use those things they learn, and that will also tell the teacher, instructor, or the tutor if the objectives are achieved. Yeah,
exactly. There's your assessment.
Yeah, assessment. Yeah.
Yeah. When I spent 10 years at Intel.
Oh, yeah, me too.
You too, okay.
Yeah.
So you recognize this. We used to say in a meeting, tell them what you're going to tell them,
Right.
then tell them what you told them.
Same thing.
Yeah. Okay. So now stepping outside ourselves to the teacher observing the class. See what I just did? I didn't explain things up front. I just gave you the models and you figured out what was important and what the lessons were from it. So much nicer for the student, more, not nicer, that's a bad word. Talk about lack of specificity. The student is so much more likely to remember if they have had to figure it out rather than if we just tell them. So, important way to learn. Okay, questions before we go to the second model, which is connected. Okay, so the second model I call the continuum, and it's really starts with what do they know. So we don't want to teach students stuff they already know. It's boring for them and it's boring for us, right? This is where the assessment comes in, the formative assessment. We're not giving them a quiz. We're maybe showing something and asking them what they see, for example. And then we're going to start with supported. Actually, my arrow should probably be going mostly. Sometimes we come back up, but there, it's mostly going down. We're starting with supported and going to independent. So by supported learning, they're where they don't have to produce between reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Reading, writing, listening, and speaking. The receptive skills are which two?
Reading and listening.
Reading and listening. Yep. The productive skills are speaking and writing. So we start with the receptive skills. It's easier to say, to answer, are these glasses? Than what are these? Right? So, and then we're going to go gradually, we're going to move down the continuum to independent use of whatever that is, the vocabulary or the grammar function or whatever. So let's, yeah.
When you say, what do they know? What do you mean exactly? Can you give an example? Because it could be vocabulary, it could be grammar, it could be, a number of things. How do you describe that? What do they know? What's an example of that?
Let's go there. I'll hold that question for a second. We're going to go exactly there. The short answer is it depends on your objectives, right? If your objective is related to clothing, you're going to show a picture and ask, what are they wearing? Or you're going to hold up. I brought half my wardrobe up to my office up here the other day, and we're holding up clothes. Just tell you, it's really hard to hold up a skirt. You have to move really far back from your camera. Okay, so before we go into examples, I just wanted to line it up with whole, part, whole. The whole is generally up here, right? We're looking at the text or the video or the picture, whatever it is, and discussing it as a whole piece. Before diving down, all of this falls into the part. We're going to figure out which part we're going to work on, and we're going to start at supported and move down the continuum, and then we're going to end up back at the whole, and that's when they can get the chance to practice independent use where we're not this sort of more open-ended.
Okay.
All right, so to get more specific, here's our cooking tricks. We're going to watch the video. First, I'm going to ask a very open-ended question. And this is particularly, it's different at the beginning of a term or when you've just met a new student than once you know the student very well. Once you know your student or students, you have a pretty good idea of what they're going to say, although they always can surprise us. So first I'm going to ask an open-ended question. Then we're going to maybe just label, what's that? What's that? Or is that? We're going to talk about the hierarchy of questions, but see, it's an egg, it's a heart shape, it's a hand, whatever the level that's appropriate for your students. Maybe I'll give them different descriptions. There's 6 cooking tricks. I can write out 6 very short descriptions and mix them up and ask, okay, we're going to watch one cooking trick, and they have to choose which description is correct.
Mhm.
Then maybe within a description, I'll mix up the sentences. This is, I'm always intrigued by the fact that this always seems more difficult than I think it's going to be. Because to put sentences in order, they have to read every sentence and understand them, and then understand the sequence and remember what was in the video and put them together. So that's definitely harder than these. An open-ended description of one of the tricks is even harder, but they've just had to now, of course, depending on the level of your students, your student might be able to just come in and do this right away. But it's going to be easier to do this after having done all these other things, right? This is the scaffolding, literally the word you've probably heard. This is the scaffolding to be able to do this. And all these are the scaffolding to be able to talk about it independently. I'll just share one quick story about this video. I did this years ago in a level 4 class, and we were in person. I had the students, I gave the students a task to do in class, and I brought small groups of students. I had divided the class into 6, maybe it was only into 4, I can't remember. And I brought small groups of students out into the hallway and showed them one cooking trick. And then they had to work together to figure out how they were going to describe that cooking trick to the rest of the class. We had not first watched the video. One of the cooking tricks is about separating eggs. And there are 3 different ways to separate eggs. You can, do it with the shells. You can do it with a bottle, actually an empty water bottle. I had never seen this. You suck up the egg yolk. And the other one was you reach your hand into the bowl and you pull the egg yolk out. And the students did a fantastic job of describing it. And when they got to the part about pulling the egg yolk out with your hands, no one understood it. There were all these blank, we had, 15 more students listening in class, blank faces all over the place. And when the students who were describing it saw the blank faces, they looked at each other and they backed up. They thought that they had described it incorrectly. So they tried again. And it was just such a powerful lesson on the role of expectations and context for understanding. Because what they had said, what came out of their mouths was exactly right. You would listen to it, you would go, whoa, that's weird, but you'd understand it. But the students thought that they had misheard, that they hadn't understood the English words. And the ones who were talking thought that they had not said the correct words.
Mm-hmm. Interesting about confidence.
Yeah. On both sides.
Yeah.
Yeah. The whole thing about the context, I think of that example all the time. Context and expectations, really, really important. Okay. All right. So another example.
You make the heart. I want to know.
What's that, Judy? Okay. So back to the turtles. This is how I would start. We talked about this. We would probably read it and ask comprehension questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure whether you would have seen this. I think it might be in the basic tutor training now. Yeah. Yes, no questions are a lot easier to answer. Is it a dog or is it a cat? Oh, is it a dog? Yes or no? Either or. Is it a dog or is it a cat? What is it? Do you have one? What do you think of dogs and cats? So in reading, okay, so I have the text here. So this is, we would we would go through and read. This is actually the read of the article. And my part, I'm going to ask them to identify the verbs. So what verbs do you see?
Found.
Found.
It's, no.
Delay.
Was going.
Went for.
Right.
Going.
Was taking.
Was taking.
Was going.
Waiting to take off.
Walk.
I saw.
Walk.
Yep.
Went.
Went.
Saw.
Right. Saw.
Airport
Okay.
closed.
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 Delayed.
Delayed.
Found.
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 Taught. Said.
You missed a couple of walks. Walk.
Some of the walks were nouns.
Was.
A walk.
Yeah, walk is a
Walk or a walk.
noun.
Yeah.
A walk.
So we're identifying verbs, and then maybe we'll talk about what is this present tense, present or past or future?
Past.
Mm-hmm.
Past.
Past, present or past?
Past.
What?
Right.
And then we might talk about, so this is probably a level 4, maybe a level 3 student, right? This is fairly advanced past tense and some irregular past tenses in here. What's the present tense of found?
Fine.
Find, thank you, excellent. So we would talk about these. The verbs in yellow, are these present or past?
Present.
Present.
Present, because it's not talking about the story. Okay, so we would do more work with these, then we might go here, right? Asking them to fill in the verbs. We have talked about it quite a bit. Then we might go here. So I'm still giving them the structure. Often if you ask students to memorize something, that's really hard. But once you've worked on it, they can do something like this. And in this kind of thing, I don't care if they use the exact words or not. So they understand the concept. I want them to get the verbs in the correct tense because that's what we're working on. So I would, if someone got it wrong, I would say, can anyone help?
Like that.
Right? If you're teaching one-on-one, you don't have someone else to help, but it's often good to ask the student to think about it again rather than giving them the answer. The more answers they can come up with on their own, the better. With my Russian teacher, every time she corrects something that I know, I think, I know that. You should just ask me to think about it again and I would give you the right answer. Okay, so here's the turtle. What do you think about? What do you think it's about? Comprehension questions. We would fill in. Then, I might put the sentences in a different order. That's a pretty long paragraph to reorder sentences. So maybe I would just take part of the paragraph, reorder sentences, read them again. And for personal opinions at the bottom, I might give them sentence starters. So this is another way of providing support, just a little bit higher up on the continuum than the very bottom, just giving them a totally open-ended question.
Linda, I had a question about questions.
Yes.
You gave us that model of the 5 levels of questions. The third one was WH questions. What is WH?
Where, what, why.
Thank you.
And
What was the last one? I didn't catch the last one.
the last one on that diagram,
Yeah.
it is open-ended. Open-ended questions. Sometimes we're also starting with open-ended questions, right? In the assessment piece, to sort of see what they know. But yeah. So let's talk about this model. What do you like, not like? What do you notice? What do you think is important?
Well, we're never in danger of embarrassing a student and causing them not to know something publicly because there hasn't been enough supported learning up to that point.
I wish I could say that I'm never in danger of embarrassing a student, but yes, exactly. That's the idea. Yeah. Your mute is on.
Technology is our friend. Right. What I think would be interesting about the continuum is knowing how to back off from the guidance part of it. And at what point along that spectrum do we let go a little bit and then let go a little bit more until finally the student is more independent?
Yeah, anyone want to answer that?
Well, I suppose when the student got all the answers right, a person could move down the continuum and make it more complicated.
But it's I was playing around. It's a really good point, Jeff. I was playing around with my arrowheads, right? But it's not never only in one direction, because sometimes we let go and maybe we've let go a little bit too much. Or if you're teaching more than one student at a time, you're going to have students with different abilities, right? So some of them will require something that's a little bit higher up, and you go down, and the reinforcement of going back up the continuum is always good. If you're doing this kind of thing over the course of two lessons, you might be in let's say step 4 at the end of the first lesson. And when you start the second lesson, you'll go back up to step 2 and then go back down again, not assuming that, just make sure they are comfortable before you keep going down. So yeah, it's all that's that assessment piece continually, right? Yeah. Other comments or questions, ideas? Yeah, Arnold.
A lot of times I have students that have a certain level of understanding of vocabulary and grammar. They just need to practice speaking to have active conversation back and forth. And in that situation, my objective is just encourage them to develop fluency, and it's much looser and less structured. I show a video, we talk, we have a good time, it's a lot of fun. They're struggling to say a lot of stuff, but I'm not as organized, as structured, and as in organized steps like you do. I just show a video at the end of the class, we say we had a good time, and then we do it again next time.
Yeah, you can certainly do that. Some ways of just even within what you're doing, providing them more, a little bit more support you say if they're struggling to say certain things, is maybe to show the video and then have thought in advance, well, what are the vocabulary words in this video that might be difficult, right? And then you could do something specifically with those vocabulary words. And generally, it's not just the vocabulary. A vocabulary word in and of itself is how do we use that word, especially if you have a student who's advanced enough to be having a conversation. So in the frame of what does it take to know a word? Does it mean you know how to pronounce it, spell it, use it in a sentence, find the adjective or the noun that are related with it, use an idiom that has that word? The knowledge of vocabulary is potentially huge. There are all different ways you can go with it. And that's not to say you should go in all those ways every time you have a vocabulary word, but that's a way, Arnold, that you can help stretch your students' actual ability to talk. Some of it, sometimes practice just in and of itself. We don't correct, we just let them talk. The goal is fluency, just right. And sometimes it's good to, once we've done that, it's good to back up and say, okay, if you notice that they were having trouble with certain things, the next lesson you could focus on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
You've given some really good ideas. I like the model too, with the starting with the supportive. I think that's kind of a natural thing to do, but it really shows that if you give them the supportive first, moving toward independent, I think the students can relax a little bit at first and kind of get their feet wet and gain a little bit of confidence. And then you move away from that and see how that confidence goes and then to come back. But I really like to have it in my mind of, am I supporting them?
Whoops, was it my video that just died or Deborah's? Deborah's, okay. Okay, hopefully she'll be back. Yeah, I think it's a really good point, is to have that in for students. Oh, there, I think you're back.
Sorry, I froze. Anyway, I like that model. I think it's just a really good one.
Good. Yeah, I'm glad it's a good point. It helping students relax at the beginning of class and know that they won't be put on the spot necessarily, is whether it's in an individual class, one-on-one, or a group, that they can smooth their way into it. That's good. And sometimes we get it wrong, but they should be able to trust us that we're not gonna keep pushing them for something they can't do yet.
I wonder if you could address pronunciation versus grammar, or some combination of the two. I think when I started as a tutor just a year and a half ago, I really focused on pronunciation because it's what I knew. But I've really backed up from that now. But I just wonder what kind of thoughts you have. And I really underlying my question is a question about perfectionism versus practice in the new language.
Yeah, I'll tell you another little anecdote. When I was getting my MA TESOL, I had to observe classes, which I still love doing. And I observed a class. I don't remember the instructor's name. I wouldn't say it anyway, probably. His students were gushing over him. Oh, he's so great. He's so great. He's so great. And I went to his class and I really had to work hard to just keep my mouth shut, because he was so focused on pronunciation. And of course he was dedicated and he was a volunteer, and our students love us generally, I think. But his motto was, if you don't say it correctly, it's not worth saying at all. And those students would not open their mouths. Oh. Some of them had been studying with him for 2 years, and they would not open their mouths because he was so focused on just the pronunciation. We want our students to be understandable, right? That's the primary goal in my mind, is communicative competence. Can I understand what you're saying? And pronunciation is so hard. We're teaching adults, right? They have lived their whole lives using their mouths in certain ways. And someday I want to study speech therapy to really understand, but to get students to pronounce sounds that are not in their native language is really, really hard. So I focus on understandability, and I'll show you some of the kinds of things that I've done recently. In my low-level group, we're doing personal bios. And we came across this word. And my Spanish-speaking students would say married.
Yeah.
Married.
Married, yeah.
Right? That's a one-off. We're in the middle of working on this. So it's about context, right? Pronunciation in a vacuum is not worth that much. It's in context. We're going to be talking about married, and this is what I did. And I know something about Spanish pronunciation, so I could tell where it was coming from, but I'd say married, not married. No, married. 1, 2, and then they could do it. It didn't mean they were doing it all the time, but they knew. If someone said marry it, I would just do, and they would correct themselves. Clyde, was there something in particular that made you back off? You said that you focused on pronunciation and then you've backed off of that more.
Well, actually, I'll try to say this briefly, but I read an article about a study that non-native speakers of English have a better conversation if there is not a native English speaker present. So let that sink in for a second. Non-native speakers have a better conversation. They exchange more information if a native speaker is not present. So actually pronunciation and grammar might be obstacles to understanding. It would be as if you took a 3-year-old and corrected their grammar constantly. They might decide not to talk rather than to try to talk with appropriate grammar, because their minds would not be maybe developed enough to really appreciate grammar or copying speech patterns or things that a 5-year-old does automatically. Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I saw that article.
Are you familiar with the article?
Yeah, it's pretty recent. It's pretty recent.
Yeah, it was. I wish I could find it again. I can't find it. I'd like to find it.
I'll see
I
if
lost it.
There was a podcast about it too. Yeah, it's that very delicate balance between accuracy and fluency. And sometimes we just want to focus on fluency and just want them to talk. And you may have experienced this. Have you had a student who said, "Oh, I want you to correct every error that I make"?
Yeah.
That would be, and I say, yeah, right, okay. They'd hate me. They'd never open their mouths again.
Right.
The concept of choosing one or two things, and if you're doing something where fluency is the goal, then you're not correcting in the moment, but you're assessing constantly, right? What mistakes are they making? And that is giving you fodder for the next lesson, for the next time you are focusing on grammar or on pronunciation. If there's a pronunciation issue that impedes comprehensibility, then yeah, in the context of that lesson, it's important to go there. If it's trying to get a Korean speaker to say, sheet instead of shit, I don't know if you okay. Questions? Other comments?
Oh, I have a comment. Okay.
Amy.
Yeah, I know people, I have friends who English is not their first language, but they're fluent in English. And I don't always understand what they're saying. And it seems like a real obstacle. Also, I've, dabbled in some languages and traveled a bit. And when I've gone to other countries and used my skills, sometimes they don't understand me because of my accent. And it's a big obstacle. It's very frustrating. So it seems like, don't have to dwell on it. It doesn't have to be perfect. But if it's, a Spanish speaker that doesn't know how to pronounce J's or whatever, an English speaker trying to learn Spanish who doesn't know how to pronounce J's in Spanish, it's a real obstacle. And it seems important.
And sometimes it's just distracting, right? And sometimes it really you can't understand. But if a Spanish speaker talks to you about their school, you know what they're saying, right?
Yeah,
we can do a lesson on how to say it without the "e" beforehand. Usually they don't even realize they're saying it.
Right.
But we still know what they're saying. So when you're traveling, sorry, Mary.
Yeah, I think the Clyde situation, I'm a non-native English speaker. So I think if the native speaker has imagination and listen to non-native speaker, trying to kind of imagine what they might be trying to say, it's less stressful for the learners. I think they are very afraid of making a mistake.
Yes.
In front of lots of people are, but when they are Clyde said that when there's no native speaker present, they talk more freely. Maybe they are more relaxed because it's okay to make a mistake. So I think you have to kind of. So and then when I do talk time and things like that. It's been doing this thing. I tell people that it's okay to make a mistake. Just imagine you are, say, a baby who knows this much. That's all. I have to communicate. It's just more important to try to communicate, and lots of people understand. If they don't understand and give you trouble or give you look at you in a strange way, just go to another person to talk to. That's what I say.
Use your hand. So that's great, Mari. I appreciate that a lot. In class, this is where our students, they're coming to class because they want to be understandable, right? They're coming to class because they have experienced this maybe in the street where people don't understand them. And so it is important that they get that feedback. The most natural kind of feedback that students can get about their comprehensibility is when we or other students look at them, give that look that Amy recognized when she was traveling, where, how do you know that someone's not understanding? And then they try again. There's a concept called negotiation of meaning. You say something, I don't understand you. I say, I look at you, maybe funny, you try again. I say, did you say this? Well, no, that, not that, but this, all, when together people can construct that meaning.
Yeah. Another thing is when you ask a question, don't repeat it. If they don't understand, try to say it in a different way. Keep on trying until they get it.
I have actually different advice on that one. Sometimes trying in a different way can work. My experience as a Russian learner is when my teacher would ask me something in Russian, I was able to process part of what she said. I wanted her to repeat the exact same words again, so that I could work more on parsing that set of words. Whereas if I asked her to repeat and she said it in a different way, I had to start all over again.
That's true. That's
interpreting.
True. Yes.
So then if you try it a few times in a different way and they don't understand.
That depends. Yeah.
Sandy.
Yeah, I often talk to my students because they express frustration that Americans speak really fast, and I will encourage them to also remember that, firstly, we have all sorts of accents even within native American and or English speakers. So, accents are a common thing, but, speaking slowly, trying to make sure you put breaks between your words will both help you be understood and also help you understand, so that's one thing. And then also I do talk a lot about context, just like you were mentioning earlier. I mean, they might not know what I'm saying, or I might not know what they're saying, just literally based on what we just heard, but I know to expect what word that might be. And then I can say, did you mean blah, blah, blah? They go, oh, yes. I said, okay, and I'll say things like, oh, well, we say it this way, or something like that, which is different than saying, this is the right way. I think it's more like, well, this is how we would say that, or something like that. It's a little bit more coaching, I think, than trying to make them feel like they're being evaluated,
Yeah, the other thing, if you're teaching more than one student at a time, we're as teachers, I think we sort of like parents understand their 2-year-old and no one else does, right? We're used to listening to different accents maybe, and a student can, if 2 students are supposed to be, ask them a question and the first student doesn't understand, I have to keep myself from doing the interpretation. Tell the second student, ask her again, ask her to repeat. And that way the first student gets that feedback in a more visceral way that she wasn't comprehensible. She has to slow down, speak slowly, articulate more carefully to repeat what she said. And I won't do it ad nauseum, like we said, we don't want to embarrass anybody, but yeah, that's another important technique.
Okay. Clyde, may I make a statement? What Clyde brought up about when a native speaker is in the group, the people tend to share less than when the native speaker is not, and brought to mind the idea of the power differential when we're learning language. And to realize, to just be aware that as the teacher, we have, there is some intimidation level. And as an English speaker already, there's a power differential. And so extending kindness and warmth and acceptance is so important for anyone in that position to be open to learning.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we have just a couple minutes left. There's one thing that I want to demonstrate before we go, and that is, I've mentioned a couple times the use of pictures. So I've given you, for each of our resources, and you'll see a lot more of this next week, I'm giving you my favorite places of where to go get those things. So here are a couple of favorite places to get pictures. Here's a picture, and in the hierarchy of questions, I would say, is this a hat?
Mm-hmm.
Is this a hat? Who has a hat, the father or a son? Who has a hat? Who has, what is this? Is this an apple? Is this an apple? Is this a watermelon? Who has a watermelon, father or son? Who has a watermelon? And then I might elicit sentences. The father is wearing, who can tell me? The father is wearing what?
A hat. A scarf.
And a scarf.
Sure.
The son
is eating.
Eating what?
Watermelon.
Watermelon. I do a lot of putting blanks in to help students understand what I'm looking for them to do. Okay, so so with pictures, the goal could just be vocabulary. This is a simple picture, but it could be, what's his stripes? He's wearing a striped shirt, actually. The goal could be vocabulary building, sentence building, fluency development. A picture can be a whole discussion prompt. We can be asking students to tell a story based on a picture. Pictures are good for differentiated instruction, so you could ask different kinds of questions to different students. And as we've talked about, they're good for assessment because there are lots of different levels at which students can answer that question. So that's the first example from our list of resources is pictures. Any questions? Okay, so homework. I'm a big believer in homework. It's hard to learn anything in 1 hour a week. Yeah, let's edit this just a little bit. So think of a student or a class or a student. If you are not teaching, you can make someone up. Maybe it's someone that you've met. Maybe it's your spouse. Write a lesson objective. So that's a little bit higher level. Write an activity objective and think about the continuum. Where along the continuum is it your activity going to be at the very supported top end of the continuum, or is it down lower toward the independent part of the continuum? You could do more than one if you want. And choose a picture and describe your activity. What will you do with that? So let's keep them simple. We don't need to, we're not going to go into videos and all that. We're going to do that next week. And when I say choose a picture, you can have aids with that picture. So your picture, you can give a picture that has sentence starters underneath, for example, or you can list the questions that you're going to ask about that picture. And if you want to, this is for you. If you want to share it with me, great. If you give me permission to use it as an example in class next week, great. If you just want feedback on it, also great. You can email And if you can, we're meeting Wednesday afternoon. I'm going to be back east visiting my mom and my sister next week. They're in Canada, so I haven't been able to see them in 2 weeks. I'm very excited. In 2 years, rather.
Oh,
The border, they're in Toronto or near Toronto. The border's been closed.
Oh,
so
the borders are opening. Yeah.
the borders
Exciting.
are opening. So if you can just give me a little more time, if you want feedback or you want to share it, can email it to me by the end of Monday. That would be great. And yeah, we'll go from there. And if you have questions or whatever during the week, feel free to send me a note.
Are we going to get a copy of your PowerPoint or?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I'll send it out. It was in my email with this Zoom link, but I'll send it out again. Oh, and Brian, thank you very much. Brian shared in the chat a link to the NPR article about the Tower of Babel, as they called it, the article that Clyde was talking about. I'll put that in the email.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I watched the podcast and lost the article. So
yeah.
Good.
All right.
Great.
Thank you so much.
everyone.
This is great.
Thank you, Linda.
Great.
yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. See you next week.
Thanks. Yeah, see you next week.
Buen viaje. Buen viaje.
Oh, gracias.
A Canada.
Большое спасибо.
Oh.
Merci bien. Obrigada.